Dennis, how you doing?
Good, Alex. How you doing?
I'm doing great. This is the me with my guest time, and it's a phenomenal time every weeknights that come back downstairs. It's actually my hybrid office. Like the work office is right in front of me, and this is my kind of my man cave ish little space. So every time I come downstairs, get my dogs to sleep, and it's a great time. So I'm doing awesome. Um, Before we start the regular programming, I'm going to ask you a question that I've had asked my guests for the past year and a half and more. Um, where are you located, Mark? Dennis, sorry. Where are you located, Dennis? And how has been the pandemic going for you?
Sure. And that might have been a Freudian slip there with Mark, because we'll talk about a Mark later in the podcast. My brother, I'm in Greenville, South Carolina. And the pandemic, as good as it gets, it's prolonged. I thought the summer of hope turned into the fall of darkness. And you're talking to a guy that just recently got over COVID. I had it. Labor Day weekend here in the States was September 7th, and I got diagnosed. I knew I had it because I couldn't smell, and I had like what I thought were fall allergies. Uh, Not to get controversial and political, I was vaccinated. Don't want to go down that road, but I did get the vaccine, both of them, and it helped immensely. But I don't have experience without COVID, without the vaccine, so I can't talk to that either. So I'm just glad I had it. It felt like a head cold, lost sense of smell. It's all back, and I'm on the rebound. I feel really good. It was all from that neck up. So the pandemic actually got me right at the end here. Well, who knows what the end is? We don't know if this is the end.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
wishful.
Yeah, yeah. I don't project any timeline right now. Like we like you said, like it was the summer of hope, and like everyone was like, yeah. By the end of the summer, everything's gonna be good. Everything's gonna be fine. Back to attending shows and going to the cinemas, and like, well, sorry to. I hear here that
Yeah,
we're not.
not
It's not
happening.
easy.
And I did some things recently. I did exactly what you said. I went to an outdoor concert. I saw the Yonder Mountain String Band. I loved it, little bluegrass. Then I went to an outdoor sipping safari at the zoo where I volunteered to pour wine, and I was just in the back pouring wine outside. I thought everything was fine. But when we did like some kind of contact tracing, because my wife was with me at the time, and she goes, I think you got it at the barber shop. When I went to the barber shop here in the States, I walked in and nobody had a mask on. I should have turned around and ran out of there, and it was pretty crowded. And I said, but no, I need a haircut. And I sat down and I thought, all right, maybe we're out of this thing. Maybe they know something I don't know. And a couple of days later, I got COVID. Like, all right, maybe they were wrong and I was right. Should have hightailed it
Costly
out of there.
haircut, right? A costly haircut.
Very, very expensive haircut. Doesn't even
He
look that
left a
good.
tip. On top of yours, he left a tip.
Exactly.
um, like the reason why I asked that question is, like based on like the multiple guests that I had that I asked the question. There's really something around the state of mental health based on like what's going on. Like you said, like the fall of darkness, which kind of um, gives like a powerful image of like what people are going through. Like in some and well, actually in some people's life. Like the isolation, the depression.
Yeah.
Have you witnessed that, Dennis? Like have you seen like people kind of um, state of mind, or just like their like their general happiness level drop?
Well, it's interesting because I'm in the suicide prevention business and I work part time for our state of South Carolina, the Department of Mental Health. And initially, Alex, according to the experts here in the States, initially we saw a dip in suicides when COVID hit. We're a resilient bunch. Think about it. Everyone rallied or isolated, got together, and it was good. I'm not a fan of this thing going on and on. I'm worried about our long-term mental health now as this thing is prolonged. And I don't pretend to be anything I'm not. I work in the grant department. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. I
Sure.
was an accounting major in school, but I do work in suicide prevention. I'm not a fan of this thing going longer and longer because it's going to force isolation that we didn't want. But I am a believer in resilience. I'm a silver lining kind of guy, and I think a lot of people will have some traumatic experience with COVID, post traumatic, what we call PTSD. They will have it. It's a traumatic event for a lot of us. Heck, I just had COVID. It was, people in the hospital, people dying. It's 1,900 a day here in the States. It's traumatic. Um, but I'm going to try to trick my brain, my own personal brain, Alex, into thinking about post traumatic stress growth. And I would tell all your listeners right now, you better Google that because that's what I want. And I try to trick myself. If I was in my office, I have a poster with the 5 things that happen, deeper relationships, increased spirituality, all this stuff that's more positive that happens when an event happens. And you've probably seen this as a podcaster. You will be talking to somebody and you're amazed at their story. You're like, holy mackerel, how are you still standing up? And they just go on. And it's unbelievable. So I'm going to try to trick my brain into post-traumatic stress growth. I want to grow from this. I want to figure out
The-
a better version of me.
there is definitely, like I would tend to say all of my guests I'm impressed by, like some have, to my judgment, like have worse stories than others. But like the resiliency is, I think the Cold Turkey podcast is actually just that. If I could describe it in one word, would be resiliency, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
some, like it's just freaking shocking, like that they're still even alive. Um, all that to say that I think you said it best. Like I mentioned this almost on every episode since I started asking the question is, um, like should our states and authorities worry about a bit more about that post traumatic, um, like state, like that people are going to be in. Um, Here we had a wave of feminicide for a while where like the state authorities have like did few a lot of ads and like they wanted to kind of tell people not to stay isolated and all that. But like I'm worried that like there are people that either haven't been reached by like or didn't find themselves identified by like what was proposed. Um and yeah, like it's something that almost always on the back of my mind, like it, like how, but I love the post-traumatic stress growth or post-traumatic growth, like I love that
Yeah.
because it's something that, like if you, like, like neither am I a psychologist, but, like, and neither am I, like a big advocate of like The Secret, but I truly believe that, like fake it till you fake it till you make it and believe it is is something that like I use a lot. Like so, if you keep having those thoughts forced by yourself into your mind, you're like there's I think there's no other way but to at some point believe it and live it. So yeah, I love that. Love that.
Absolutely. I love that thinking. Fake it till you make it. And also, with the resilience piece, if we survive this, and we are, if you're listening to our voices right now, you survived the pandemic, the onslaught, it's still going on. Um, if we get past this, the resilience will be built in. We can get past anything. Hopefully, we have
Yeah.
that attitude.
All right, back to my regular podcast programming. I do ask my guests to rewind their life story tape to a marking event as young as they can remember that kind of initiates the people that they'll become. Like sometimes for people that have used or have had trauma, it's those little first kind of obstacles in their life path that like they identify as this is one moment that like as kind of curb that that way down my road of life, like so. um while drawing me like a bit of a family picture, can you identify where like or what climate or what setup kind of started building the individual you are today?
Oh, absolutely. And I have to mention my family because it's a big part of the traumas that I faced. I'm one of 5 kids, Alex. I have a sister, Sheila, older, brother Mark. I told you we get to that name. Dennis, that's me in the middle, Janice and Matthew. And when I was in college in 1983, I went to school in West Virginia University. I was at university when the phone rang, and it was a Wednesday, and my sister was telling me I need to come home. I'm like, no, I'm exactly where I need to be. And she told me that my older brother Mark died by suicide. So there's a trauma introduced at an early age. I'm 20 years old, right? Still trying to figure out my way in life, and the pediatric brain doesn't stop forming until somewhere in the mid 20s. So I'm not in a good spot. I The drinking age was 18 in the States at the time. I was 20, so I was already drinking a lot. Irish Catholic, we don't have a lock on it, but we do a pretty good job of trying to get to the top of the heap. Uh, I was drinking a lot already, and then when Mark died, I drank a hell of a lot. It's what we'd all call a negative coping skill. I was in pain, and I was going to mask it, and I was going to do drugs, alcohol, you name it, pile on, and it was on. Um, Every one of your listeners can relate if they've gone through something, blackouts, uh, obnoxiously drunk all the time. I would open up a bottle of wine. I remember when I first met my ex-wife, I opened a bottle of wine and I threw out the cork. And she goes, "What are you doing?" Like, she wasn't a big drinker. I'm like, "Oh, we're finishing this. Like, I'm not putting the cork back on there.
No,
We're
no,
that doesn't
come on.
happen."
That's
I'm
like
throw,
that's a curse.
yeah,
Why would
I'm throwing
my
it
wife
out.
does that? I'm like, you don't know how to drink. Like, what's wrong with you? Like you
We're
keep a
going for
cork.
it.
What's that? What's worse? Like what's wrong with you? I want to rewind a bit back further though. Dennis,
Ooh,
like, is there um what was the family setup? Like you talked about the 5 kids. Like were your parents together? What kind of was like was your father? Like you talked about the Irish Catholic, but like so was your father a big drinker? Was there like a somewhat of an influence of use? And not saying that he was necessarily an alcoholic, but like was this something that what you were used to in your entourage?
yeah, think about it. 5 kids, small house outside of New York. I was born in Brooklyn, but we moved into suburbs. Up in the Hudson Valley, and it was tolerated. It was there was a I wouldn't say it was promoted. It was tolerated. I'd come home. Gosh, I think the first time I really got drunk and threw up was like 8th grade, going into 9th grade, which would put me at 14 years old. 13, 14, going into the next phase of my life. High school, it was on. I mean, it was Friday night football here in the States. It was drinking. It was on, and it was tolerated because I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. I love my dad. He died a couple years ago, but he drank. My sisters drank. My brothers drank. It was part of our fabric. We go out to eat at a restaurant. My mom would always complain that our bar bill was way more than our food bill. Uh, and it wasn't uncommon. Go back earlier when I was a little kid, when my dad, who was a really good commission sales rep, he had good days and he had bad days, but when he had a good week or whatever, we go out to Chinese food, and my dad had to have his cocktail, like a vodka straight up, and we had to wait for him before we ordered. He had to finish his drink because, the 7 of us sitting around a table, and like, he doesn't want to rush out of there. He's just going to enjoy this. And it was always at an early age, it was always around, and when you're a little kid at the party and all the uncles are there, they'd always say, "Hey, Dennis, go get me a beer. Go get me a beer." They always grab a kid. They always grab a kid. Go, "Hey, go get me a beer. Go inside, go get a beer." Um, so it was just tolerated. It wasn't actively promoted, but it wasn't frowned upon. And looking back, I'm a guy that needs guardrails. I know this now in my life with my ADHD. I need tight guardrails. I would have loved for someone to come down hard on me and say, "You
Yeah,
can't live like that." But I can't fault them either. I came to that conclusion myself eventually. Um, but it took a while. It took, 14 to 31 when I gave up drinking. So that's what, 17 good years of liver damage.
yeah. What was there? Like and I'm asking the question because like that, like a lot of the typical families had that, like kind of the drunk of the family, where which people would frown upon, saying, "Well, this is too much." He doesn't know how to behave, and cannot handle his drinking. did you have that? Like which was kind of the funny uncle or like whatever.
What do we call them? The drunkles? Yeah, we couldn't. You couldn't shake our family tree without a drunk falling out. They're everywhere. We had them all over the place, but they were wonderful people. I don't want to throw anyone.
Yeah.
I loved them all. They were very nice and fun. Um, every event, like a christening or a communion or a family gathering, was centered around the bar, and it was my dad built the bar downstairs in our house. Everyone had that. There was like hey, go down to the bar, and go get it. Um, it was festive, celebratory, yeah, but like most people, we had a couple that went over the edge, and most families, and they went over the edge, and I don't want to. I love them all,
Oh,
and I
no,
don't
no,
want
no,
to.
and that is
Yeah,
not the purpose of
that,
that, but, like, it is sometimes it's almost
yeah.
influential because these guys, they're a bit more they say, like, they out like, they voice their opinions louder than most, like, and so as a kid, you're like, "Oh, shit," like, Uncle Jack is he's awesome. Like he allowed me to, I don't know, look, whatever, like drive the car, like sitting on his knees, like he allowed me to do shit that, like looking back, you're like, oh my God, like he jumped from he jumped from the roof of the house into the pool. Jack is is crazy, but I love it, like, so,
Yeah.
um, and it has, so as you said, like it has somewhat of like a positive influence, meaning that like it becomes kind of, oh wow, okay, so that what that's what drinking does, like like it allows me, if I feel shy, if I'm introvert, I see that and I'm like, wow, like I want a bit of this too, like I want to, like I want a piece of that for sure, like, so that's why I always ask that question, because for me it was, like the my grandfather would brag that he couldn't be laid down by rye gin, So I remember this as young as I can remember. It was always like almost like a contest, like don't, like maybe beer and maybe this and maybe that, but don't bring rye gin. Like you're not gonna lay him down in rye gin. He's not gonna pass out on rye gin. Like it was just where, like
Wow.
looking back, it's like how weird is that? Like how messed up is that? And the other thing is that while there could be, and I can have memories of that, like my aunt and mom fighting over that bucket because they're both throwing out. Um, I think it was at my communion or confirmation, but like either of these. Um, if I had spoken about weed, for example, they would have lose their shit. Like so. So you had this major intoxication going on, but as smooth or has and I'm not saying that weed is light drug, but like it like some label this as light drug. This was like this was the devil, like
Oh yeah. The reefer
I'm
madness. Yeah.
yeah. So for me, it's always ironic to think about that, and the influence of like the how social and socially accepted was, was alcohol and still is. It has a huge impact on, like on our youth, like the way that we perceive it. It's just like, yeah, like you have to have a drink, which you see,
Huh.
fast forward, you see that on, when I stopped and I worked in sales as your dad did. um I had a friend that had recently stopped as well, and we go to kind of to happy hour, I kind of meeting with mingling with customers and all. And so right off the bat, I grabbed like a soda with lime in, which looked a bit like a gin tonic and whatever. The, the 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 individual I was with was just panicking. He was like, "What am I going to drink?" I'm like, "Drink whatever you want. Like you can drink water if you want, but drink whatever you want. Like there's no rush in having a glass of wine or having a rum, or like there's no." He's like, "Yeah, but everyone's gonna see that I'm not drinking like they do." And I'm like, "Who cares?" Like it's, but there seems I'm that I'm. I felt it very little in my 16 years of sobriety, but like there is a social pressure to kind of be part of and be, you know, yeah, be part of.
I get your friends' pressure there because I had some of that too. I'm 27 years sober now, and early on in the game, I remember I followed my dad into sales, and I was working for his company, and I was at a golf outing, which is forget it, that's a blowout right there. And we all ended up back in the bar, and it's raffles and dinner and all this stuff. And I remember going up to the bartender because I was worried about it. I just started this job, all these guys are getting hammered, and I said to the bartender, I said, "Give me no duels and pour it in a glass." And the guy looks at me, and I just, I'm maybe 7 years into my sobriety. He goes, "How long you sober?" I said, "About 7 years." He goes, "I'm 11." The bartender was sober. I'm like, "All right, dude." So he knew exactly what I was doing. He poured it in. He goes, "Here you go. It's on the house." He supported me. So it was
Yep,
interesting. And then you get to a point, and you know this, Alex, you get to a point, you don't give a rat's rear end what people think. That's the beauty about getting older. You really don't care.
absolutely.
You
Yeah,
don't care. I don't care if you don't think I don't drink. I love myself sober. So blow it out your rear end. I don't want to hear it. Um,
exactly. Um, so what kind of kids were you? Were you an introvert? Were you kind of shy? Were you, like was alcohol kind of a good helper of, like whatever, kind of asking the question, but
no, I would say an extrovert. I was a punk. I was always getting in trouble, ADHD, hyper, running around. I had a lot of wonderful friends, still do this day, but alcohol for me was just like another outlet. Like, eh, reckless abandon. When you have like ADHD, you go balls out. That's only one speed you know. So when I was drinking, it was balls out to the end, and I wasn't good at it. Looking back, I really wasn't good at it. So it wasn't like a tool to get me socialized. It was just a tool to get me feeling good. And I was already out and about and hanging out with my friends, and I ran with a group that drank a lot. And that, just part of the culture that we were in up there in New York. And it was I enjoyed them. I still stay in touch with those folks. They're wonderful people. They've supported me throughout whatever my endeavors. One of them being sobriety, but it wasn't a crutch or anything. It was just a happy little escape
just a
and
booster.
a booster. Yeah, adrenaline booster. And most times, you know this, and all your friends out there who drink. Most times, I was a happy guy drunk. Every now and then, if something got in me, and asshole came out. You guys suck. That guy. You all stink. Uh, but most times, I was a happy-go-lucky guy. I would pass out early most times. I wasn't a heavyweight. I was a lightweight, but I was right in there with them,
Yeah.
trying.
Looking back, you you mentioned your brother passing. Did you guys know, or today know what was going on with him?
Well, most folks who die have some sort of mental illness or a trauma. There's a debate on which one, but you got both, whatever. Mark was very quiet, and he did battle depression for years. And looking back, you could really spot it. And hindsight is 2020. But Mark, he was drinking with me. He had good jobs, bad jobs, lost them. He did not go to university. He stayed home, and it just nothing was clicking for him. He was a brilliant guy. People would bring over stuff to our house to fix, and Mark would fix it. If Mark couldn't fix it, it was broken. Toasters, clocks, stereos. Neighbors would drop stuff off, say, "Mark, take a look at this." He was gifted that way. And maybe, looking back, maybe a trade school or something would have been a better fit. But again, the hindsight's 2020. He was lost. He was in pain. He left a note. Uh, he thought it out. He planned it, and gosh darn it, he left us, and it was sad. It was still sad. Died by suicide. I remember getting that call, and I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it, and I had to go home. And then what I did, Alex, was kind of stupid. I went home. I got the call on a Wednesday. I went home Thursday, and I was back at school on Tuesday. We buried him over the weekend, and I went back to school, and it was on. I just didn't take a time out. I kind of ran away. I ran back to school, and it got ugly quick there. I was drinking a lot, and it was not
How
good.
how much of a shadow did it project on the family then? Like, because I mean, your parents were still together, alive. What like how like was then the kind of the yeah, what was the family like? Like, because sometimes it breaks families. Like so.
It fucking wrecked us. Let's be honest. It wasn't good. We never talked about Mark, and this is where the story gets even sadder. Remember, I talked about five of us. Three boys: Mark, Dennis, and Matthew. And if I was drinking what I'd say was an Olympic level, Matthew was a pro. He was really going for it. And 11 years after we lost Mark, and we never talked about it, we never grieved properly. I think, in my humble opinion, just looking back, nobody knew what to do. Everybody gets grace. You go, shit, we didn't know what we were doing. And 11 years later, I'm now married. I live in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I got a pretty damn good job at Merck Pharmaceuticals. I'm a sales rep, really good job. And on a Monday, the phone rang, and it was my sister Janice again. And in a drunken stupor, in a drunken effing stupor, my younger brother, with access to lethal means, he's gone. That's two suicides in one family. Two. One is too many. So Mark wrecked us, and there was a repercussion of Matthew. We weren't regrouping or anything, and that's why I think if I could have done something different, I would have stayed closer to Matt and maybe taken that semester off because he was home. He was at ground zero. He was the younger brother. He had to stay there and saw that he got hit by the shrapnel. I just bolted and went back to university, and then from university I didn't go home. I went to New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and just stayed. I actually moved away from New York, sort of in a way of just getting out of there. I had to get out of there. And I was in Pennsylvania when I learned about Matthew.
And you said that those events, even at family gathering, um, the family didn't talk about these
We
or
didn't talk
about
about,
this.
I think not talking about Mark cost us Matthew. That's my opinion. My sisters may disagree with me. My mom, who's still alive, may disagree with me. But I think if we would have, there's a saying in the suicide prevention business, Alex, that postvention is prevention. After Mark, if we did proper postvention, if we rallied, maybe sort of counselor, got some professionals involved, who knows where the
Yeah,
trajectory of the family would? Who knows? Who knows? We might have lost two more. Who knows? I don't know. We lost Matt because we didn't do anything. So I'm a big fan of that. In addition to doing suicide prevention work now, postvention is important. If something happens, you got to swoop in. And I never want anyone to have to go through what my family went through twice. I don't want anyone to go through it once. In the States, I don't know about your Canadian statistics, but in the States, it's about 45,000 people a year die by suicide, or 130 a day.
I
That's
think it's the
awful.
first or second biggest causes of death for men here
Yeah,
in Canada.
that would make sense
So
because men are 78% of all completed suicides. And I should have pulled it up before I got on the phone with you, but 78% of all completed suicides are dudes. Women have more attempts, so they're not off the hook. We're not going to slight any of your audience right there because we're all in this together.
when Matt passes, I mean, it was it plan ahead as Mark was? No.
No, he didn't have like Mark had a thought out methodology. I don't talk about methods, but it was planned. There was some preparation. Matthew was in a drunken stupor with access to lethal means, which is a very impulsive decision, and it's something you can't come back from. You can't change your mind. And I've listened to these guys who've jumped off. Kevin Hines is one of the guys who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, and the minute he went over the rail, he said, "Instant regret. I made a huge mistake." But he had like 4 seconds to think about it and hit the water. But he lived. He's one of the 1% that lived. So, and if you talk to anyone and what people are who have been there and have attempted suicide, they call those people with lived experience. They went there, and by the grace of God, they're still with us. All right. I'm a survivor of suicide loss. I've been deeply touched by losses in my life with Mark and Matthew. So all those voices are needed in the battle I'm in today. To reduce that number.
the and I'm just guessing that was the taboo um pursued along with the like with the passing of Matt.
There's a with a suicide death, the taboo and the shame and the guilt that comes with it, it's not like anything else, Alex. Like if Matt was driving down the road and a boulder slid off a cliff, I could say, "Oh, act of God," and crush the car. Oh, we lost him. But a suicide, it comes with a whole set of baggage that nobody wants and nobody asks for. And to the day I die, I'll be asking, "What if, could have, should have?" Till the day I die, I just have to get used to it. Um, that's the bummer of it all. They were in pain. I have to give them grace. Something, they wanted to escape it, and that's the avenue they chose. I don't think they ever thought, and I can't speak for them, but I'm going to go on a limb here. I don't think they ever thought about the repercussions. I don't think Mark ever thought years later we'd lose Matthew. If you told him that right before and said, "Listen, you do this, Matt's going to die 11 years from now," we'd have stopped him dead in his tracks. You know, um, I just don't think they see it. They can't see it in that moment with the depression, the anxiety, or whatever they're going through, the trauma. They just can't see it. And I wish they saw it.
And what I meant by that is, relative to, like you said that the family gathering was, like just not talking about it at all. Was it the same when it happened with Matt?
Yeah, when Matt died, I went dark pretty much. And this is the start of my sobriety story. I was driving back from New York to Carlisle. And I remember it's a 4-hour ride. Uh, and I remember driving down the highway saying, "Dennis, what are you going to do with your life?" Like all of a sudden, I felt vulnerable. I was the last Gillen boy. And I'm like, "What are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do?" And I decided to take a time out from drinking. And I also made a deal with God. And I'm not recommend this for anyone, but I was so pissed in that moment, shaking my fist at the sky. My ex-wife and I were having trouble conceiving at the time. And I made a deal. And I said, "God," I remember that I was crying and yelling and cursing at the sky. And I said, "God, if we get pregnant," and I don't tell this story too often, even when I do my suicide prevention talks, but I think it's important for your listeners to hear this. I don't recommend it, but it worked for me. Here's what happened. I said, "God, if we get pregnant, I'll never drink again." And I already stopped drinking because I was depressed. And you know this, and I know this, your listeners know that alcohol is a depressant. It just is. That's the chemical classification. If you're depressed, you probably shouldn't drink, but it's hard not to. Sometimes it makes you
Hmm.
feel better. So who knows? Who am I? I point fingers, 3 fingers are pointing back at me. Who am I to say? Um, so I made that deal, and about a month later, we found out we were pregnant. And a deal's a deal. I'm a man of my word. Um, and I've been sober ever since. And I got a son out of the deal, Martin, which is awesome. And then a couple years later, we had Brendan. So I got 2 boys, which is kind of ironic. I lost 2 brothers, and I have 2 sons. So um, a deal's a deal, and that started my trek to sobriety. I just hold that baby. I'm like, I can't drink anymore. This is the greatest deal I ever made. Look what I got. Um, so it helped. And initially, I thought I would have to avoid some people. Like, remember the story about the bartender? I thought,
Yep.
I was trying to get comfortable. And believe it or not, your true friends, and God bless them, I got a bunch of them, they rally around you. They will rally. And what they really rally around is the fact that you're probably the greatest designated driver they know. Uh,
Yes, and they probably have seen something that you finally see much earlier than you do. Like that. Like, oh shit. Like Dennis should stop.
yeah, Dennis, you kind of sucked at it. And the fact that you quit it, I support you. Yeah, I
it's
wasn't good
it's
at it.
friends approved. It's a lot of time friends approved. It's like, yeah, I'm thinking about stopping. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. It's like, really? Like, so.
Yeah, you suck at it. I did have one guy. It was funny. I have good friends, great friends, and then one guy said, "Dude, when you quit drinking, I gave you like a week." And I'm here to tell you, I looked it up before we got on the line. It's 9,926 days sober. I looked it up. I'm doing this thing called time between dates. I know the last night I got drunk was the night we buried Matthew. I know that. I have that date because I have the gosh darn um, obituary in my wallet. I know the last time I got drunk. So all I have to do is pop that date in and pop in today's date, and it tells me how long I've been sober. Um, and it works. I encourage your listeners to catch me. And I didn't do the 12-step program, but I'm a big fan of it. Whatever works for you works for you. I got traumatized into it. I hit rock bottom. I couldn't get out of bed before noon. I was so damn depressed about Matthew, that I couldn't add any. I always tell people, like, there was already a fire. I don't want to put gasoline on it. Alcohol would have been like gasoline on an already raging fire. It would not have helped at this point. So I decided to
What
take a time out.
what was the secret though? Because like that was my next question. Is like it's one thing to make a deal with God or whoever is up there, but which comes out to being a deal with yourself. Um, it's one thing to do that, but then when that other end execute on that promise, you need to execute on your end. What were the, I mean, a lot of people that I've spoken to when they tried by themselves, it was a pain in the ass, so what were the, you talked about 12-step program, but what was the kind of the toolkit you carried with you to be sure that you wouldn't have that next drink?
There was sheer will, and I'm stubborn. And I'm telling you, I'm a man of my word. I'm loyal to the day is long. Um, a deal's a deal. And the other thing, and your listeners can't see, we're doing this over like a Zoom call, whatever. We can see each other, but your listeners can't see. But in my pocket at all times is a laminated two-sided obituary of both brothers. And whenever I think about anything, I whip that out. Like if I'm having a bad day, I pull that card out and I go, holy shit, those were two very bad days. They make this day pale in comparison. Come on,
Yep.
Dennis, you've got this. You've got this. And like many of your folks out there that have been on a sobriety journey, there's a hump you have to get over. That you do. Like, gosh, St. Patty's Day would roll around. I'm Irish, any kind of football game when we go out and play softball, golf, any kind of recreational thing, we always celebrate with a beer, whatever. And yeah, you have to there's some workarounds you have to get around there. Like I told you the fake beer story. You told me, I'd go to a bar and I'd order club soda with a lime. It looks like a drink so anyone doesn't question me. And then somewhere over the hump, I fell in love with sobriety. I liked who I was sober, which is, I didn't like who I was drunk. I really didn't like that guy. And that guy needed to die. And sober, Dennis, is much better. I feel everything. I feel the highest highs. I do feel the lowest lows. You
Yep.
can't selectively pick. I just want to feel joy. You won't know what it feels like after a while because all you have is joy. You won't know what it is. So I
Yeah.
feel it all, and I wouldn't trade that, for anything. I want to feel it all.
So did you pick up on some kind of spiritual and mental um like daily routine? Like was there, like you mentioned that card, which like is, like sometimes for others it's, like the serenity prayer, for example, like or
Yeah.
there are, like some of that. Was there other tool on your toolkit that you would rely on, or like a meditation, like whatever it is, like you mentioned um that when Matt died, like you had that conversation with higher spirits or whatever, like it was, which is in maybe in a swearing and shouting manner, a meditation, and right, like it's
Yeah.
it's a
It's a,
it's one
it's
way
a
to
very,
do it.
very calming meditation. Listen, you F and a hole. Uh,
Well,
let
you're
me
alone in
give,
your car, you can do it whatever, however you
yeah.
want. uh,
Nah.
I don't advise this on, like if you go in a meditation center, like it works. So like I did it in my car, but like that's not good. But was there any, like did you had some kind of, like a daily routine of stuff, like some counter blessings, some,
The daily routine is interesting you say this. The daily routine involved, after 9 months after the baby showed up, the daily routine literally was me picking up my son out of the crib. And that was a physical reminder of the deal that I made every freaking day. he would make a noise, and in between that little knucklehead and my sheer stubbornness, like I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Um, and I'd pick him up, change his diaper, and look at him as a gift. And I would have this guilt thing, like if I ever drank, something's going to happen to him. Totally unwarranted, right? But uh, I'm just a, as I said, I'm a loyal deal maker. If I shake your hand, I shake your hand. If you give me something, and I'm a man of my word. And that daily reminder, picking that knucklehead out of the crib, was like, all right, I can do this. I can do this. I have to do this. I got Martin. And then couple that with stubbornness. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I don't like who I was drunk. I kind of like the guy I'm becoming, and I'm still
So you
evolving.
white knuckled it. You just white knuckled it.
Whew, just stopped. Trauma induced, got shaken to my core. And then I did go see a mental health professional. In addition to dealing with my depression, I went and saw a pro, and talked about thinking about the sobriety piece, and he probably said, that's probably a good idea for you right now. And I said, yeah, we're going to keep going. And then eventually, this from some people, and a day turned into a week. I couldn't believe it hit a year. I'm like, holy crap, a year. And I'm coming up on this weird milestone because I speak about my sobriety when I do my suicide prevention talk. So I'm looking at the dates the other day, and I was like I did tonight. It's like 9,926. Like, holy crap! I'm coming in on 10,000 days sober. So I
Yeah.
quickly did the math. Like, when is that day? It's December 5th. So I put it on Facebook. Like, what should I do on that day? And some people are like, hey, have a drink. I'm like, oh, shut up! I'm not doing that.
It was to be expected, but
Oh, I tell you, exactly. With friends like that, who needs enemies? No, they were congratulatory messages, like "way to go," and some really nice messages. And my cousin wrote me a nice message. I think your listeners, you hear this. He was really complimentary on me, and he's a good guy. And Patrick wrote, gosh, what did he write in a text message? He said, Dennis, I've never heard of someone said, my life went to shit the minute I quit drinking. That's never happened. Like, my life went downhill the minute I gave up alcohol. No one has ever said that ever. It's quite the opposite, So he was kind of making like a tongue-in-cheek remark, like, way to go, I'm proud of you. So
would you say that going over that suddenly made sobriety a gift?
it really is a gift. It's a good point. It was the gift of me back to me. It was, I feel everything, touch everything, smell everything. I don't have to apologize in the morning. That's a real gift. Remember when you're drunk, you had to call people up. Hey, listen, I'm sorry. I said some things last night. I pinched your girlfriend's rear end. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry for that a-hole that I was. And
The day
also,
after was always shit. The day
holy
after,
shit.
whatever you did, whatever happened, sometimes nothing happened, but you felt like shit anyway. Like the day after. My wife is always in shock that I tell her that, like there was nothing that nothing was best than getting drunk again. So you would wake up popping up a beer, like she was like you drink the next day. I said, fuck yeah. Like it was the best way for not feeling, like not to have that feeling inside, which we would attribute to like the morning sickness or hangover or whatever. But it was not just that, like it was really I just want to not feel myself again. Like it was, like so you grab a few beers for breakfast and you're cool. Like he's like, oh, I just solved my hangover and solved whatever that like kind of the endless hole inside that I feel. And yeah, I'm like this is how I would treat my hangovers back then. Like um so yeah, that's why I asked a question about the gift because it, like you mentioned the which is interesting because like some the comes at different times for different people, but I think it does transform suddenly the sobriety as literally a gift. Like you suddenly realize that this is the one of the blessing that look well being the designated driver could be one, but it's mostly like seeing clearer, being able to identify like the if you're a douche, like you can see it much clearer, faster. Like if you get irritated
Yeah.
for whatever, you can just kind of point the finger at it much quicker, and just the clarity, like it's something that, like, I still have a ton of gratitude for, like it's, like seeing shit as it is, and it's yeah, sobriety. Yeah, that's the wow. Like that's you make me realize that, like it became something that, like, because like I went therapy, like, so it was something you would almost like brag about, like it was just 15 days done, I got 28 days done, like I had, and then there's like the chip system at AA that, it gives you a
Yeah.
chip at 60 days and 90 days and 6 months and so on. So there was like trying to grab that next chip, like it was almost like a race to that next chip, like, okay, let's, even if it was by white knuckling it was just like, okay, 1 year mark and then the 18 months, but between, I think, the 1 year and the year and a half, um it became clear in my mind that I probably wouldn't touch a drop of alcohol again in my life, like it became something that, I became really proud of. And now, as you mentioned, stubbornness, today,
Pride.
is
Yeah.
pride, like
It is
just the
pride.
pride. It is pride. Like I have no problem defending why I don't drink. I have no problem explaining why I don't drink. I have, like, there's zero, but absolutely zero shame, which initially was something that, let's find a way to, like you said, like to kind of camouflage that, like you're not getting an alcoholic beverage at social gathering.
Yeah.
Um,
Are you less of a man? Oh, bull crap.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's crazy. Like it's
it
crazy, but
is. But we got it
um, yeah,
brainwashed.
I've told waiters multiple times that, like even recently, someone said, I think it was the second time that we went there, it was the same waiter, young kid, and sometimes my wife like just goes like one step ahead and goes like, he's not, flip my glass of wine upside down. She's like, he's our designated driver tonight. He's like, yeah, but like you're gonna be here a few hours. You can grab beer. You're gonna be okay. And it's the first time that I used that, but I said, you don't have enough here.
Yeah, exactly. You gonna bail me out when we're done?
He's like, what do you mean? I said, you don't have enough alcohol in here. It's like, we have like that huge, like stock of alcohol. If I start,
It's not gonna be
no,
pretty. Throw me out in the
don't
street.
get me started, buddy. Like, and then he told me he was 21, and I told him to go fuck himself because I'm
Yeah,
46 and I feel old. So, he's
exactly.
like, he's like, hangovers. What do you mean? I'm like, fuck off. Like it. Like it's yeah. I mean, like I love the hump image, like I've never heard that, like it's something that, and actually never thought of, but like it became, yeah, it transformation, what the sobriety is in your life, you know.
And you mentioned pride, and I'm gonna tell you something I'm proud of, and I'm gonna give some encouragement to your listeners. I'm proud of the fact that my sons have never seen me drunk. They've never seen me drunk. I made this deal before Martin came along, and then Brendan. They've never seen me drunk. Now I have beer in my fridge right now because they drink. You know, if they come over, I'll offer them one, but I don't drink. I will tell you that is cool, but I'm going to give your listeners who just heard that, and then their kids have seen them drunk, something cooler. I think it would be so much cooler, and this is one man's opinion, that if your kids saw you a mess and chemically dependent, and then you got clean and sober, and then they saw you afterwards. That would be way cooler in my mind. I'm just
Yeah,
saying they saw the train wreck that was you sobered up, and then they saw later on in life. And I've had stories of that in my family where they were wrecks early, and later on they got sober, and people go, "That's a good guy," so that's a good girl. So that would be the cooler story. I really like the fact that my kids never see me drunk. But anyone out there listening, if your kids have that senior drunk, boy, oh boy, wait till they see you straighten up. Pride, pride, pride. You'll be beaming from, ear to ear with a smile when they see that, and they observe everything. Those little boogers,
Yeah.
they know.
When when was the calling? Like you talked a lot about your implication and suicide prevention centers, and like the like and kind of giving a bit of your time and your life to like this cause. Um, when was the calling, Dennis?
It took a while. I went in my man cave after Matthew died, and I moved from Pennsylvania to Chicago and didn't tell anybody about my brothers. People go, Dennis, how many people in your family? I would say three. I have two sisters back in New York. I wouldn't mention the boys. And then one day, it had to be like 2000, year 2000, so 83, 6, 7 years after Matt died. Um, this woman was talking at a local church about the suicide prevention lifeline, where you answer the phone calls. And I grabbed her card on the way out, and I didn't want to be there, but I didn't say anything to anybody. I just grabbed her card. And about a couple months later, I called her up and I volunteered. She talked me into volunteering. I called her up. Her name is Stephanie Weber. She's a dear friend to this day. I remember I was like kind of nervous about, do I want to help others? You know, I'm doing quite well in my man cave. Do I want to come out? And I told her my story. I said, listen, I lost two brothers to suicide. And I remember she says this, she goes, you need to get your butt in here, because she lost her mom to suicide. She started this little facility and it's part of the national network here in the States. So I started answering the phones late at night from 8 to 12, answering the phones of people that were in need. And that was some of the most rewarding work I've ever done. And if I get the chance, I'll do it again. Right now I'm on the road a little bit, but Alex, that was the point where I said, I need it. You get to a point in your life when you've been through some shit and you don't want anyone else to go through it. They call it redemptive healing. You start going back and helping those people on the trail behind you and say, listen, there's a couple rocks up ahead. I'm going to help you get over them. And that working on the lifeline did that for me. It really helped my healing process. And then years later, I went in my man cave hard. I moved again and didn't tell anybody about my brothers. And then I spoke at a fundraiser about my brothers. And I sat down. I remember I was exhausted. I just poured out my heart. And some lady comes up to me and goes, you need to tell that story more often. I'm like, you need to blow it out your rear end. That's not going to happen. Like it's the one and done show. I just told you my story. And then I started speaking about him. Someone heard me speak at that fundraiser, invited me to their school. I bombed. And then I went to another school. I only halfway bombed. And by the third time I spoke, I got in a rhythm. And it's a story that people want to hear. It's a story that people relate to. And it's touched some people. So anyone out there listening, I don't have a monopoly on this, but here's what I want somebody out there who's listening is going to do it. I want you to take your misery and I want you to turn it into your mission and watch what happens. Just watch. I didn't plan on it. I never wanted to talk about the boys ever, 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 ever. And, God had other plans. And all of a sudden, here I am talking about them all the time. I do corporate talks. Um, I did one the other day, and the chat room was lighting up like a Christmas tree. It was unbelievable. Some of the stuff people were saying, it was unbelievable how they were coming. When you're vulnerable, like we are with our sobriety, when you're vulnerable, wonderful people flow into your life. It's been unbelievable what's happened ever since I started talking about the boys. And I couldn't have done it. Back to your theme, Alex. I couldn't have done any of it if I wasn't sober, because then I would be hurting.
How much of that would you, like now sharing about this, would you say is involved in your personal grieving of these events?
How much of? Can you restate the
Of
question?
sharing, like how much of giving
Ooh,
back would you attribute to, like how much of that attributes to that like your own grieving process? Because like for a while, like there was absolutely, I mean, grieving was actually almost forbidden both by you and by your family.
it's a big part of my healing process, and I attribute a lot of it to it. Talking about it, finally, it's now like I couldn't talk about it for years. Now I got like diarrhea of the mouth. I can't stop. But there are times during the presentation. I remember one time I was at a university. There was like 1,000 kids in this audience, and I forgot that I changed a picture of Matthew on my slide deck. And I turned to look at the screen, and I caught myself. I'm like, oh, fuck. And I had a moment. Like the grief just jumped on my back. I'm on stage and I'm having like a moment. And I got real quiet. And I remember sitting in my head, it probably was like 6 or 7 seconds, right? Because when you're on stage, you think it's
Yep.
forever when you're up there. And I just quiet. And finally, I just said, Dennis, you're the speaker. This is going on in my head. You are the speaker. You have to speak. And I turned back to the crowd and I said, I just had a moment. I want to thank you all. And those kids were so respectful. You could hear a pin drop in that audience. They gave me a moment. And I said, all right, folks, I'm back. Sorry about that. I told them, I said, I changed that picture and just caught me off guard. They were wonderful. And it's been that way ever since.
And yeah, and I guess like that, like my not of suicide, but like my sister passed recently. My younger sister
Oh,
passed recently of like, and I say recently, like a few years back. But like there's and my mom passed right when the pandemic kicked off. And there are multiple moments where you're like, mom would have loved to see that, or like, and it must be the same for Matt and Mark, like where when your son was born, and when whatever they do is like, fuck, like Uncle Matt would have been proud of you, and like Uncle Mark, if like they do repair a toaster, like they would say, hey,
yeah, he's
Mark
handy
would have
like
said,
that. Yeah.
you know,
And I,
um, yeah, these are the moments that like you kind of miss that they're not there to see that, like to miss that, like he'd still be alive, would be probably doing this or that, like you can have all kinds of yeah, it's yeah, it's just a shame, it's just a shame.
it is a shame. And you bring up an interesting point there. There was a time in my life I had a debate. When am I going to tell my kids about the two uncles they don't have? And I just, again, you may pick up the fact that I'm a spiritual guy. I just said, you know what? It will reveal itself. When that day comes, it'll just show up. And sure as shit, one day I'm on the phone talking in my office. I worked out of the home and I was talking about Matt and Mark. And I hung up the phone and I turn around and my son, my youngest son, is standing right there. I never heard him come in. And he looked at me and goes, is that true? And I said, yeah, we got to sit down and talk. So I sat him down first. I'm tearing up thinking about this because it caught me off guard, but I knew I didn't freak out. I said, well, this is the day. It was coming. Here it is. And I sat Brendan down and told him about it, his two uncles that he doesn't have. And we had a mental health discussion. And I said, listen, we have a family history now. Um, if you ever get into this serious situation, you got to tell me anything. And by the way, when your brother gets home from school, I'll tell him the story as well. It's not for you to tell him. I'll tell him. So when Martin got home, I told him. So that was a tough day, but I knew it was coming. And I'm glad we had it. And we do talk about in the Gillen family with the boys, we do talk about our mental health all the time.
That's that's awesome, like that there's something about that taboo. I fortunately don't have, like a story that, like I was, like impacted by, but like you hear so many of these stories, like, and they are so many of these stories actually out there.
That actually makes me very happy, by the way, that you don't have a story. That someone in the suicide prevention
Yeah,
business, I'm like, yeah, I hope you never have a story. Unfortunately, there's too many of them, and it's a pleasant surprise, Alex, that you don't have a story. So thank you for sharing that non-story. I'm sorry about the loss of your mom and your sister, because your sister was younger, and I remember Matt was younger. It's just different. Like it's not a linear. I should die
yeah.
first, then she. Yeah,
It's not
uh,
normal, especially for my dad. Like it's not normal. Like so
yeah,
as a parent, you're not supposed to survive your kids. Like you're
yeah.
so and for some odd reasons, this is something that we have a lot in on both sides of my family. The oldest brother of my father lost his daughter when she was 14 or 15.
Oh,
Um, like scooter accident, like just like like just a bad accident. Um, they were like on the countryside, and she picked up like that little like motorbike, and got hit by a truck and died. Like so it was sudden.
oh,
Then one of my uncle, well, on my mother's side, um, it was sudden as well. 16 or 17, gym class. They were running around the gymnasium, stop, drop dead, heart failure, gone.
Oh,
And so I have pictures of me with him, but I don't remember him at all. But there were a lot of, um, which is funny, but like I don't think there is one word for that in the English vocabulary neither. Of when you're, like when you, how do you call when like you lose your parents, you're
an
in French
orphan?
is orphelin, orphan, yeah, orphan.
Yeah,
But there's not a word. There's no word in both neither the English or French vocabulary for when a parent lose a kid.
that's a good point.
And there may be a reason for that, like because it shouldn't
Yeah,
happen.
it's a horrible situation. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you're
So yeah. So it's so bizarre, like that I talk about this because my uncle's he's getting old, and like his health is slowly, like yeah, like he's growing old, and he wrote this week because he lost his wife like 5-10 years ago, and he wrote this week, I think not later than yesterday, he wrote a note to her on Facebook. You'd be that
oh,
old. Yeah, it was just like you'd be that old. Fortunately, you're with mom. Blah 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 blah. It was just like, ooh, like it was. Yeah, it gave me the chills. I was like, fuck, like that many years later, like that, you know, um, it never heals. Like it just never heals.
and that's okay. That shows there's a positive aspect to this. That shows the love he had for her. He's never going to forget her.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
and a shared joy
yeah.
is a double joy. A shared sorrow is half a sorrow. And there he is sharing his sorrow on Facebook, and whatever he wrote, whatever he posted, somebody's going to call him up and say, "Dude, you're all right," and he's going to share it. So that's actually a big way I get through life. A shared joy is a double joy. A shared sorrow is half a sorrow. And every time I talk about my brothers, I cut my sorrow in half. For any of you math majors out there, I'm never going to get to zero. A half of a half of a half of a half. I'll always have some remainder. And that always means my brothers remain with me. So I don't want to get over it. Your uncle doesn't want to get over his wife. That's okay. We honor them. And for any of your folks out there listening, we shared some traumas, and your trauma is your trauma. I never want to get like in the trauma Olympics, like, oh yeah, this happened. Oh yeah, this happened.
Nah.
Whatever happened, yeah, whatever happened to you happens to you. And how do you deal with it? I tried two different ways. One with Mark, I tried drugs and alcohol. That didn't work out so well. And with Matthew, I tried sobriety and getting a mental health counselor. And that's the reason I can talk to you folks today. Um, I took one was a dirt road, a bumpy dirt road. One was a paved road. Both roads we had to travel, but one was smoother than the other.
And it's funny that you mentioned that. Like there is absolutely no grading or leveling of pain. Like there's no way. Like there's some. Like it's funny. Wow. Like it's funny you mentioned that because you're like sometimes you share your life story. Someone's like, how can you still be alive? You're like, what? Like like so there's no way like you can grade and level and identify one pain more hurtful or more hurting than another. Like it's so it's there's nothing about trauma. Like and that podcast would probably not exist if it was like kind of the yeah. So for 2021, Dennis was quite a ride. Like so,
Yeah, exactly.
he picks up gold for how many traumas he had. Like it's just that's not it. It's just um I think for like like my feeling like is like for people that listen um is that everyone like everyone's different for sure, but everyone goes through shitty times, and there's no grading to how shitty it is. It's just
Yep.
that everyone goes through stuff. Like that's why I tend, like I try to have as many different challenges in people's lives as possible. You know, I've, like it's for someone that has, like a food disorder, listening to us, which it's easy for us. We just had to take zero alcohol. You cannot take zero food, you know.
Yeah.
So, except when I've spoken with people that had food disorder and had, either anorexia or bulimia and all that, well, resolving this or fixing this or, getting better with this, like our solution is easy. We completely stop, but you cannot live without food, So like the solution is not complete abstinence. So, like kind of a full blown 360 different approach to that, like so there are so many challenges, like that, like sometimes you listen to that and you're like, oh shit, like that my approach is not the right one, but like I can definitely see myself in, the way I handle pain or I handle challenges or I handle, like the events and yeah, like that podcast has tried to, bring as many different life stories as possible.
And you
Um,
hit on you hit on a big thing there, Alex, about the traumas. Is a friend of mine went to rehab for heroin. I often share the stage with somebody in recovery. Like when I do my thing, this if it's a mental health forum, there might be somebody who recovered from a serious addiction, like heroin, and like this guy did. He went 12 times to rehab. 12. We never give up on people, but he had a interesting point one day. He was in there, and his not his counselor, but another counselor was walking by and said, "Dude, what are you doing here? Like you were here like a month ago." And he just, hey, I had a rough go of it. And the counselor asked him this, and I want to ask your audiences too: if any trauma you're facing and you're engaged in a negative coping skill, be it the drugs, possibly an eating disorder, anything that's going on that's what you would say, drinking alcohol, whatever. What are you running from? That's what this counselor said to this guy. He goes, dude, what are you running from? And then he walked away. And the guy sitting in the hallway waiting for his counselor going, holy mackerel. That just opened a can of worms. And it was. He was running from something and he was using drugs or alcohol to hide from it. And
yeah.
eventually he ran towards it. And now he's sober and he does this whole recovery clinic, which is really cool. But I would ask that yourself and any of your listeners, what are you running from? When you're engaged in a negative coping skill, what are you running from? And explore it. And I'm a big fan of mental health professionals. Explore it if you have to with a pro. Peel the onion, get down there and get in there and see what's in there. But I recommend professionals for sure.
Last thing I'm going to ask you, Dennis, where can people find you? Like you said about doing public speaking. Like do you have, like do you use social medias? Do you like where can people find you?
Sure. I'm actually transitioning. I used to be, it's still out there. I used to have my own website called dennisgillan.com. Like, wow, how original. My name, Dennis Gillan, GILLAN.com. It's still out there. It's a good website. I love it. But I'm moving towards our foundation. And you're gonna laugh when I tell you the name of the foundation. It's called the Half a Sorrow Foundation because a shared joy is a double joy. A shared sorrow is half a sorrow. And so you can go to halfasorrow.org and find me there. Uh, I do a lot of Zoom meetings. And what I try to do, Alex, and this is, the sobriety piece is a big part of my recovery, is I try to go upstream and get people really comfortable talking about mental health because I don't want to be in the suicide prevention business forever. I want to get people way upstream saying, it's okay not to be okay. And say it, raise your hand. Because if Mark would have raised his hand, it would have changed the whole trajectory of the Gillan family. I'm telling you right now. And he had a chance, and he just couldn't do it. And I get that. So that's where they could find me. Yeah, I'm on Facebook. Twitter agitates me a little bit. So
Yeah, not a
it's
big
not good.
fan.
Not good for my mental health. So I'm on Instagram. My name, Dennis Gillan, or at D Gillan. And then I have two Facebook pages. One is my personal page, and then there's one, Dennis Gillan Half a Sorrow. That's where I post more of the upbeat stuff. And I'm going to do more of that soon here as my contract runs out with the Department of Mental Health. I'm going to go full bore. So I'll be more active on the social. I'm not very active right now, and it's actually good for my mental health.
Yeah. Yeah, especially right now, like we're not in good times with the social media. Let's say it that way. Like Twitter has become the host of cleavage and house of echoes. Like so if you and the social networks are not in a good shape right now.
Nah, it's not. It's not healthy. Instagram, heck, there was a survey or not an internal document. Facebook, they know it's not good for teenage girls. They know it. Horrible for them. And I
It
thought
is.
that was one of the nicer platforms, but they get that fear of missing out. They start comparing themselves. There's actually like a obsessive comparative disorder. It's coming out in people comparing themselves, and they feel themselves inferior when you're watching everybody on their best day. Seriously, F you and your cheeseburger. I don't care.
No, and it's not just your best days. Like like it's the lighting that like the best influencers takes sometimes hours before taking that fucking shot. Like so don't give me don't give me that I just snapped this while I was on the beach. Fuck you. Like there's 10 people around you
Holding
lighting you on the
tinfoil.
good. So it makes me go crazy. But when you're a teen, you don't have the capacity to understand that. It's just like, my God, she looks like a model and she just captured this with her phone. Well, fuck off. Like that's not reality. And like it makes me, because my Instagram, like that's why I talk about House of Echoes, like, which is I don't know if it's a good translation of it, but like it actually, what I'm meaning is that the algorithm gets to know you, and it's going to show you if you're, yeah, exactly, if you're outright, like most of the recommended sites are going to be outright, and like and so on and so forth. And so young kids or teens, if they start to look for a guy, like that kid, if he starts looking for like bulky and cut teenagers or cut adults that does like the musculation and all that stuff, like they're going to see mostly beach bodies, like when they look at their search, like that they're going to
Yeah.
be recommended, like kind of like you said, like that it becomes kind of a um, trauma by comparison. um, and my Instagram is such a messed up feed of like just like people bailing, like people, like it's just I run away from anything that looks polished, like that, like I don't need that. Like I don't, my cold turkey podcast has more of the, like that words of wisdom shit, like
Sure.
that, which.
Uplifting.
Exactly, and I love it. Like it's, but again, like it's hard today. It's hard to decipher. Like the honest, genuine, from the fake, because like that, they perfected, the fake genuine. Like so.
Exactly. The deep fake. It's out there. It's all bullshit. We're old enough.
um,
I'm old enough. I'm old enough to like love it when my phone dies. I actually get happy. I'm like, oh, good, my phone died. If I'm out
not there
somewhere,
yet.
I'm so happy. I'm like, sweet. I'm not plugging it in. One day it died on a Sunday morning. I remember I was here at the house. It died on a Sunday morning, and I said to myself, you know what? I'm not plugging it in until tonight. And I went the whole day. It was awesome. It was awesome.
Wow. Yeah, you're good. You're better than I am. Like like, yeah, like I don't know if FOMO, like the fear of missing out, is really something that like technologically is, like we you, phone is
You
an
say
addiction as well.
you give me all these compliments that if I pulled up my screen time app right now, I'd be totally ashamed. so, so save your accolades. It is
Exactly. So,
addictive.
Dennis, thanks so much for your time. Like it was a great conversation. Like I that's why I fucking do that. Like that's, like I want to meet people like you, Dennis, all the time. Like and like 2-3 times a week. Like I'm blown away. Like it's, I'm gonna repeat that, but like I'm a perfect stranger to all of my guests. like 2 years in, like it's not people I know, believe me, like I don't have that wide of a circle of friends, like so. I started off with friends, but like it quickly became people that just don't know me and wanted to be part of that journey. Um, and I meet with incredible people, and like I feel blessed. I'm full of gratitude of that, and you're not part of that, Dennis. And um, it's yeah, I'm just blown away and humbled by that. Like, and so you reached out, and I'm happy you did.
Oh, I'm glad I did too. And Alex, you start off on your podcast as strangers and you end up at friends an hour later, and that's what we all should strive for. So
Yeah,
I appreciate
thanks
it.
a
And
lot.
you are a friend now, so stay in touch.
Thank you, Dennis. Take care.
Alex, thank you very much.
Bye bye.